Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a very special presentation of A Concerto is a Conversation, a New York Times op doc, and a short film that's been Oscar shortlisted in the documentary short subject category. It had its world premiere at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival, and it's offered courtesy of Breakwater Studios. We're going to run the whole film. It runs about 13 minutes, and we have the directors of the movie, Ben Proudfoot and Kris Bowers, joining us for a Q&A with Nana Adwoa Frimpong, our very own MFA candidate from the School of Cinematic Arts. I should also mention that Ben is also an alum. Do you guys want to say anything before we start? I have the movie queued up, but I realized we didn't talk about maybe doing an introduction.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Thanks so much for watching and for being here.
I don't know what to say other than we hope you enjoy the film and come with your questions. We want to answer all your questions, and we will be totally honest with you in our responses, right, Kris?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I'll see you guys back in 13 minutes. Okay, let's welcome back our filmmakers, Ben Proudfoot and Kris Bowers. And Nana, the floor is yours. Take it away. If anyone has questions, just put them in the Q&A box and we'll take them when we start to open things up.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you both so much for being here. It's such an honor to speak to both of you about a film that's just like inspired me. Kris, before you got on, I was telling Ben that I say your name in casual conversation too often. So, but I'm wondering for both of you, as you know, co-directors of this film, and Kris, this is your story and your grandfather's story. What is it like to see the film again? Like, does something new come up for you every single time you watch it?
I think for me, it's really just the same. Like I actually stepped away for the beginning of it, and then I just watched the end of it, and the end of it almost makes me cry it would make me cry if I wasn't on this Zoom right now, but I feel like that's that feeling I have every time whenever he says, I just hope I had a little something to do with it. That moment always, I just continue to think about like what that line is going to mean for me for so many for the rest of my life, and it's really, yeah, I always get hit with the same feeling, which I think is just overwhelming gratitude and appreciation. Yeah.
Cool. Ben, what about you?
It's the same moment for me. I think it's the moment when Kris and his grandfather are staring into each other's eyes. That's just such a, I don't know. I just want to stay there forever, bouncing between them. I think, I've talked about this a little bit with Kris earlier today, but I lost my dad in May of last year. And I don't know, there's just like something that's such a wellspring of love and connection that, their conversation achieves. I get the same feeling. I mean, I've seen this numerous times, hundreds of times. And it always just hits me right in the heart at that moment. It doesn't seem to be diminishing, if anything, maybe even growing, which is really weird for a film that, we made. But I think that's a testament to Horace and what his story means.
Yeah.
And can you two talk about that, like how this collaboration came to be and what that process was like?
You want me to start, Kris?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. So the process started it was going to be a much less interesting film. I wanted to make a film about Kris composing this concerto that was going to premiere at the Walt Disney Concert Hall in February. This is last February. And I was working on doing something with the LA Phil and wanted to do some stuff with music in Los Angeles. So Kris and I have been friends for 5 years and have a lot of same mutual friends and stuff. And so I called Kris and said, hey, can I make like a 2-3 minute film about you writing this concerto? You know, we won't get in your way, like, you know, take an afternoon kind of thing. So that was how this project began. So I went over to, Kris was very generous and said, come on over to the studio. And we went over there, and it was like a Tuesday morning, and Kris was all dressed up. And I said, how come you're all dressed up? And he said, well, I just came from this dedication ceremony for my grandfather. They are naming a block of South LA after him, the Bowers Retail Square. And I, you know, like any good documentary filmmakers, I thought, you know, what's the deal? How did it happen? And Kris basically told the story that you see in the film with all those same beats of, you know, Bascom and hitchhiking across the country and coming to Los Angeles and finding a different, you know, story of racism in Los Angeles, and how he used his ingenuity and his persistence to overcome that. And that set the stage for Kris's career. So right in that first meeting, we sort of locked eyes, and we knew that this would be really a journey from slavery to the Walt Disney Concert Hall, and how that happened, and, you know, zooming in on Horace's life, and can we make a film that's a dedication to him? And as we sort of picked up that mantle, Kris and I became more and more involved with it. He obviously became the interviewer. He became, you know, was in on screen and in the director's chair, pulling the story out of Horace, and we became partners in crime, and that's how the collaboration began.
Kris, I'm wondering for you, what was it, or were you completely down from the beginning to be on camera and to share your grandfather's story?
Yeah, I was much more comfortable being on camera once my grandfather was involved. I think in the beginning, I was kind of regretting having said yes to having them document this process. I was very scared to be entering. But I think yeah, for me, it just felt like so right. And you know, there's those moments where I think we both could recognize in that moment that, like, had I not been coming from that event that day, like, we wouldn't have thought of that. And so, you know, if in moments like that, I think, especially coming from the jazz space, or Ben and I talk often about, like, improvisation and collaboration, and how much when you feel those moments together, just to go with it, and for me to have a chance then to, like, share my family story, my grandfather's story, and you know, the idea that it would be, for me, because at that time we didn't know what it was going to be. We were just making this short film. It wasn't like, I don't even know if the New York Times wasn't even involved when we got involved when we first made the thing. So this was really just about trying to capture this story. And so for me, it was really just like, I'll have an opportunity to capture my grandfather telling his story in like an incredible cinematic way, knowing Ben and Breakwater's approach to filmmaking. And so it just felt like a no-brainer to me. Yeah.
There were so many emotional moments for me in the piece, specifically when your grandfather puts his foot down on the pedal, and then you do as well on the piano. And I'm just interested, did you have any idea? I know you knew some of your grandfather's story, but did you know the details that he shared in the conversation you ended up having?
Not all of them. There definitely were a lot that came out, and a lot of, you know, I think that I understood there were obstacles when he got here, but I didn't understand all of the obstacles or how he went about like getting around them. There's a story that didn't make it into the film where he talks about a test he needed to pass that he took 3 times in LA, and the guy in LA, he realized, just wasn't passing because he was Black. And so he ended up just going to San Francisco and taking the test, and then coming back the next week and avoided getting closed because of that. And, you know, all these types of stories I think were new for me. And also just knowing that he did all of that as quickly as he did it. The fact that he, you know, got here at 17 and had $27, and then 2 years later owned the Cleaners. I think putting that math together is something I didn't really know until that conversation, into that moment where he said that. And you know, we were just talking earlier today about the idea of just how at this point I'm 31, and I think about how much life my grandfather has lived. Like, you know, when I was a kid, I can look at my grandfather and hear these stories about, oh, he was here when he was in his 20s and did this in his 30s. And when you're 18, that feels like still a little far away. And then I think now looking at what he accomplished, you know, at those ages, having, you know, been through that time in my life, feels like even wilder to me. So yeah.
then you are very much in the business of articulating the intimate parts of one's life through the documentaries that yes, that is you. So I'm wondering for you, what do you see as your responsibility as a filmmaker that is working with archival images of people's life story, you know, like really intimate details of their life? How do you position yourself in that conversation?
Yeah, the responsibility is immense, right? I think pretty early on, I realized I didn't have the intestinal fortitude to make documentaries that were where I was interviewing someone and then the documentary would turn out to be like somehow against them, or that I would like catch them out in the interview. Like, you know, there's a lot of documentaries like that where like you're interviewing people and sort of incriminating them in the interview. And I realized that I didn't want to do that. And I was going to leave that to people who were a little more brave and educated than I. So the niche that I have found for myself as the filmmaker is really where I'm putting myself in the shoes of the storyteller, and I'm taking on the responsibility of taking in total the story that they're telling, the spirit of it, and you know, shepherding that story through the filmmaking process, which obviously is a reductive process that takes, you know, in this case, 7 or 8 hours of conversation and boils it down into 13 minutes. So the responsibility of that is immense. And for me, the ends meet when the person who is in the film sees the film. So in this case, it would be, you know, Horace, seeing the film for the first time and whether it strikes him as true and whether it strikes him as something that he's proud of. And, you know, gladly he loved the film. And I think Kris was saying how it was the first time he had seen his grandfather be emotional in his life. Yeah. But it's a big, you know, especially with films distributed on the internet as short documentaries are, if you even have a slightly unusual name, if your name is Googled, that's going to be the first result probably for the rest of your life. So it's not something we take lightly. We try to make sure that we do it right, and we are able to share, you know, obviously with permission, the intimate and profound details of someone's life in a way that other people can connect with, and is a you know, a way to reach through the screen and feel like, you know, you're not alone, that your experience has been shared by someone else. So I take that responsibility very, very seriously, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm wondering what the process of collaboration really kind of looked like in this case, because Kris was leading the interview. And so, Ben, I know that you usually are doing the interview. So
yeah,
what does it look like on set for the both of you?
That made me I've never been in that position to be like over in the corner watching, but it was so much more intimate than, like, it was just immediately intimate between Kris and his grandfather. I mean, it was a weird process. I mean, it's not, you know, Kris and I weren't co-directors in the sense of like, you know, Bert and Ernie next to each other making every decision, because obviously Kris on the other side of the camera for a lot of it. You know, Kris did all of the heavy lifting in terms of the interview. We came up with the idea together. You know, Kris was extremely involved. Obviously, he wrote all the original music for the film, and, you know, we did the sound mix together. I did some more of the heavy lifting and the editorial. So it was kind of like, you know, two parents who had different jobs and kind of, you know, would come back and forth and we'd hand it off and that kind of thing. But I think, considering the fact that it was about Kris's story, imagine that assignment of, hey, write this cue for how well your career goes. You know, Kris is like an extremely modest individual. So I think there was some like nightmare in situations where, you know, Kris was in front of the camera, had to write this music. But that's why it was such a pleasure to work with him, because he was a consummate professional at every turn, and, you know, was able to walk that fine line and really keep the focus on his grandfather, which was the point of the film. But I don't know, Kris, if you have anything to add to our collab.
No, yeah, I think that summed it up really well. Yeah.
There is a true reverence for Black masculinity, I would say, in the film. Just, Kris, you in the conversation with your grandfather, and even you speaking about your being vulnerable and talking about how you feel like an imposter and feeling like you don't even know if you should be in the spaces that you're in. And I'm wondering, we have such, it's better now in terms of representation of like what Black masculinity actually looks like. But I'm wondering for you, did you have reservations when it came to like admitting that sometimes you feel like an imposter and feel like you shouldn't be where you are?
I think firstly, I've always been a pretty like sensitive guy. I think that's probably mainly why I became a musician and pianist. And that's the moment that piano connected for me, was when I realized that like if I couldn't talk to my dad about being sad, that I could like play it on piano and feel something. And so it's always been inside. I mean, I think it's inside of all of us, but like it's all about trying to find ways to access it. And I think that lately, especially, I just got married, and my wife and I are in therapy together, therapy individually. Like there's definitely I'm in a time in my life where I'm feeling much more okay with like that aspect of things. Like I grew up in a household where like my brother went to therapy early on, and he was embarrassing our family like to my parents in a lot of ways. And I think that at this point they're much more like now they're like proud of me going to therapy. And so I think there's just a lot of evolution that had to happen within my household to be that vulnerable, or to be in touch with those feelings. And honestly, I feel like my grandparents' space was always a space where I felt like I could be a bit more honest about those things, because I think there's that generational gap where they're not as concerned about like maybe how they're representing themselves, because they're your grandkid. So like at that point you're not really thinking about that. And I feel like I always talk to my grandparents about pretty, maybe like the more difficult things, or more like troubling things about, like, I talked to my grandmother about religion a lot. She's a Jehovah's Witness, and I didn't agree with her about religion, but we had those conversations. And I talked to my grandfather about like, struggling as an artist, or like trying to stay afloat financially, or all those kinds of things. I felt like I could come to them and there was no judgment. There was no like, this is actually what you should be doing, or they just would listen and give me advice based on their lives. And like, and especially with my grandfather, I feel like there was so much advice when it came to how to like persevere through career. So I think it's something that just kind of felt very natural. I think I was at a place in my life where I wanted to have that kind of conversation. And I feel really thankful that like Ben even like came into this came to me to like help facilitate this conversation that ended up being so therapeutic for me, just because I feel like to have that level of conversation with my grandfather is something that we haven't really had the chance to do, because our conversations maybe are like short or here and there. And so for me, it just felt like, yeah, like what else am I going to do? Like this we have this opportunity, and I'm sitting here with this person I feel so comfortable with. I'm just going to like talk about how I feel, and not really think about that. Yeah.
And Ben, I'm wondering for you, just kind of bearing witness to that, like, is there something that you learned or something that changed within you in seeing Kris and his grandfather connect?
So many things. I mean, it's funny. The whole afternoon was very memorable to me. I mean, they talked about all kinds of things, only a tiny portion of which is in the film. I mean, for me, Kris and I were friends. And so we went from being sort of casual friends, seeing each other from time to time, to his entire life and ancestry in detail being my full-time job. And also really taking time to open my heart to what he was feeling, right? And the kind of challenges that he was facing, and the kind of almost like real and phantom challenges that are like a constant plague for him as a Black composer who is a rising star in Hollywood. And then through that, seeing how Kris's grandfather had all these compounding problems, there was something really profound about hearing the story of someone who I was already friends with. And to be able to sit with that throughout an entire year and editing it, especially this year, as the movement for Black Lives has brought the conversation and brought the systemic, racism in this country and around the world to the fore, this personal family story has been a really welcome and vivid window into that experience that enters me through the heart, as Kris's friend, and now Mr. Bowers' friend, and that has touched me in a different way that isn't academic or in my mind. It's really a feelings thing. So I'm very grateful for that.
And Ben, can you speak more to your, personal style and aesthetic when it comes to making documentary films? Because what is so true about your work is that the focus on the face is like a thing that is so powerful and so beautiful. Yes. And so I'm wondering for you.
If I was framing this, I would be like up here, right?
I know, we'd all be like. Wondering for you, like, what is it about, your subject's face in particular that makes you frame it in that way?
I think maybe it's a part, I remember reading something about Alfred Hitchcock saying that Steven Spielberg was the first director who made movies without seeing the proscenium, right, of the stage. And I think I count myself as part of a generation of filmmakers who, think about this thing, like it or not, think about this thing when it comes to the distribution of our films, especially short documentaries. And it's not like I don't love going to a movie theater and watching a movie. I love that experience more than I can explain. But the truth of the matter is, having made short documentaries for many years, this is where people watch them 90% of the time. And so as a filmmaker whose, desire is to make a connection between the storyteller you're seeing on screen and you, I have several tools that I can use, one of which is how to compose the face. And, if I were to frame this interview like a normal documentary where it's back here and there's like an eye line over there, if you're watching this on your phone, my head's about the size of a small grape, right? But if I go tighter, you can get a pretty good look at what the nuances, what the subtleties are of that person's face, what their expression is when they say something that's really intimate, or they give an opinion about some key thing in their life. You are studying their face, as we do as humans, for how do they feel about that? Are they lying? Is there something more there? Is there something textured or layered? And to me, I love that experience when I'm watching a documentary, is really engaging with somebody's face and engaging with the subtext. And I need to see all those details. So that's a big reason why I'm here, so that even people who are watching on the phone, which is most people, we can see all those details. Because at the end of the day, I want to make that connection with whoever's watching it. And I have to be realistic about where they're getting it. As little as I like to know that our beautiful 7-1 mix is coming through speakers the size of a grain of rice.
I love these food references for Simon. It's great.
I'm in the kitchen here, so picking out things. But yeah,
that's great. Kris, for you, I know, like, you talk about never, once again, imposter syndrome and not knowing that you were going to be where you are. I wonder, did you ever imagine being a director and like being the subject, director, and composer of the same film at the same time?
Yeah, never that, and never the subject. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a director. I funny enough, Ben and I first met because I wanted to make my own short film, and a mutual mentor of ours was like, "Oh, you have to meet Ben Proudfoot," and he lent me camera equipment, and then we edited there, and I don't think Ben has even I've shared the film with Ben yet, just because I've been so.
I keep asking.
It's like a terrible short film, or like student film.
I bet it's not.
But I think that process, I really fell in love. The thing that kind of made me fall in love with it the most, I think, was working with Kobe Bryant on his documentary. That was one of my first scoring projects, and I actually got that project because of a USC alumni, Jake Block. and he and I were friends in high school, and he remembered me talking about film scoring, and so he brought me into this Kobe Bryant documentary. And Kobe was basically becoming a student of cinema on that project, where, like, you know, at the beginning of that project, he didn't know who Darren Aronofsky was. And then, like, when Darren Aronofsky was brought up, the next day, Kobe had watched 3 Darren Aronofsky films, could understand what they were talking about when they were talking about the way he was editing. And when I came on that project, it was interesting because Jake brought me on when they were what he thought was like a month away from finishing, like, you know, usual typical time, like 1 or 2 months before finishing a doc, like have a little bit of music. And I came on and Kobe was like, I hate this. Like, we're starting from scratch. And they did the entire documentary over. And so I was a part of that process, watching them make this whole documentary from scratch, and watching the editors talking like how they're building these scenes, how they're approaching it. And because Kobe was all about craft and everybody understanding that craft, it was much more than just like me being in a silo writing music. It was, we were all in the same space very, very frequently. If I was with an editor, that editor was explaining to all of us how they were approaching cutting a scene, and like what they were talking about with, like, you know, building the character and like all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like that process really got my wheels turning, and watching Kobe Bryant go from being one of the best basketball players of all time to being, you know, an Oscar-winning director. I felt like, you know, that felt like something that it's really all about, just like, you know, immersing yourself in it and trying to like be obsessed with it, and me trying to look at it as a musician, I've always been really fascinated with. So yeah, it's something that I'm just at the beginning of exploring, but definitely it's bitten by the bug for a little while.
Here, I think all of us preach the things that we most need to learn, and as people who create work that touches so many people in such distinct ways, I feel like everybody can like talk about your various works, both of you, and like say where they were when they watched it or heard something, and connect to it so profoundly. So I'm wondering for both of you, if it is that you've ever been able to like step back for a moment and just kind of like look at your work, what does your art say to you?
Ooh, God, you've got some good questions.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Here.
Yeah.
You know, I'll take that. I'll take a stab and buy Kris some time.
Yeah, thanks.
So you owe me one, Kris. You know, if I were to see a commonality in a lot of my films, I would say there's a lot of grief. I think, you know, this film, thank God, doesn't have. I mean, it does in a way, I guess. But I think, you know, I've in my life, I've had a few instances where I've lost really close people to me suddenly, some not so suddenly. And a lot of my films kind of like fade to black with some horrible loss at the like 2/3 mark or 3/4 mark. And then the last part of the film is somebody dealing with this loss and how to rebuild out of the ashes. And I often explore those stories. I think that's probably trying to work out how to do that myself. But I try not to think about it too much. But this has been the cheapest therapy session I've ever had. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kris, over to you.
Oh, man. I feel like, you know, I feel similarly. I definitely am attracted to very dark things. But I guess something else which I think Ben's work speaks to as well, but like also hope and incredible love in relationships. You know, I think that like even when I think of something like When They See Us, which is such a dark, really hard to watch project, it's really all about the love that these parents and all these mothers have for their sons, and how much that love really kept these men, these young boys and now men, able to survive all of that, you know. And so I think that for me, that's something that I feel personally connected to, and really feel like whenever I'm working on a project where I can find that level of connection between either people or a person and whatever their love is, is something that I definitely enjoy working on.
Thank you both for your answers. I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to go to
Yeah.
the Q&A box.
Great.
So everyone put your questions in. So Ben, I've heard you speak about debuting at Sundance with this film, and how if this had happened when you were a younger filmmaker, it would have like bowled you over, because I think you said that when you start out, you're like trying to get into Sundance, and then having a career and a life, you learn to find that value and importance in other things. And I'm just wondering, as two men who have made such huge strides in their career, and in many ways have been labeled for those things as to what you can do and what you have the potential to do, I'm wondering for both of you, what has it meant to achieve your dreams, and how do you keep perspective and keep dreaming?
Wow.
Yeah.
Have you directed a documentary? I think you would be
seriously.
well suited to be. I'm serious. I don't know. Have you done that yet?
I'm in a prep course with Amanda Pope, who's on this call. Hi, Amanda.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, come to Breakwater Studios and we'll set you up. You are a very good interviewer, I have to say.
Thank you.
But now we have to answer your question. I was just buying time. But I no, seriously, and I'm sure everybody watching this can also see that. But Kris, you go first on this one.
Yep. Can you rephrase just the end of the question one more time?
Yeah, I'm wondering, what does it mean? What has it meant for you to achieve your dreams? And how do you, in like all of the accolades and people saying your name and all of the things that come with success, how do you keep perspective and keep dreaming?
Yeah, I think that kind of similar to what Ben was just talking about for himself, but I feel like, especially in the last like 10 years, I've had some pretty like low moments in my personal life, like losing really close friends of mine or family members, or just having like kind of difficult moments and a lot of like growing pains, and that happening at the same time is like a lot of success in my career and a lot of like material success. I started to really see that discord and that disconnect very quickly, that like, oh, these great things are happening that I always dreamt of happening, but I don't, I don't feel whole, and that's not what's completing me. And like, all that kind of stuff, I think is something that has been pretty helpful. And also coming from my family, they're all just so much about family being what's most important and above all. And for me to be able to even be who I am or where I am today, it's all because of how much my parents sacrificed and how much effort they put into like what I was doing. And I wasn't even aware of my parents' life, or like what they were going through, or like their ups and downs and all that kind of stuff. And for them to be able to put that aside to like be there for me shows me how much like that's what's real. And like every time I talk to my grandfather, one of my favorite quotes in the film is when he doesn't remember what school I went to, and even when I say Juilliard, he's like, yeah, whatever that place is. And I think for me that's like so great, because he's just like, how do you feel? How are you taking care of yourself? How are you taking care of the people around you, your loved ones? Like it's all about that. And that's been the thing that's really helped remind me, especially with all the crazy ups and downs of this industry, or how much of this industry is based on other people's opinions, and how much you can get caught up with other people's opinions of like your work or any of that kind of stuff. I feel like the thing that's been most helpful is to remind myself of what's real, and how to make sure that I'm as healthy as possible and the people around me are as healthy and happy as possible.
Good answer. I mean, I feel very similarly. I think actually when I was at film school, it became pretty clear to me that there were kind of like two sets of people that wanted to be someone, right? They had an idea that they wanted to be the next insert filmmaker or movie star or whatever. And then there were the people that wanted to do something, right? That they just really loved writing music for films, or shooting, or directing, or working with actors or whatever. And I think Hollywood celebrates those who are very clear of who they want to be, and sometimes lifts those people up, but they're not necessarily doing anything, or they get too obsessed with the being and forget about the doing that got them there in the first place. So I think for me, when I see, you know, us have a success like getting into Sundance, or gosh, you know, just this whole experience of getting shortlisted for an Academy Award, all those things, I just have to double down on the doing, right? What's the next film? How good am I directing the films that I'm working on right now? And then, you know, just the reminder of Mr. Bowers, like Kris's grandfather, like he's not listing off all of the, you know, money that he's made off real estate or the success he had on this deal or that deal or whatever. What is he proud of, right? Seeing his children and grandchildren become successful. And I think it's like, it doesn't take much to see that no amount of gold or glory or fame or mentions or press, no amount of that will satisfy you on death's door. All that will matter is how you treated others, and who did you leave behind in terms of your friends and family, and what kind of impact did you make? And so, you know, the more films I make, the more times that's layered on over and over again, as the you know, I don't know, it's too broad, but the meaning of our time here. And so I just try to remember that and put less stock in shiny things, and more stock in what I do and what kind of things I leave behind.
Thank you both for such thoughtful answers. I'm now going to go to the Q&A box. So we have a question from Jay McGregor, who asks, you guys mentioned that you had 7 or 8 hours of footage and condensed it to 13 minutes. I'm curious about how you guys decided what to cut and what to keep. What was the process like?
Well, that was just the interview. I would say this film probably, I mean, Kris, between concert hall and filming at your place
and the cleaners,
it's probably close to 20 hours. I mean, we have to talk about Lucas, who is the film's editor, Lucas Dong. He did an incredible job. I mean, it's tough. You know, one of the things is you go off memory, right? What do you remember from the interview? What are the key points? For me, what Kris had said right from the first meeting before we ever did the interview became, you know, our starting place. And then, you know, really it's a refinement process, which we did eventually in conjunction with the New York Times OpDoc's team. And so I think the film went through 15 or 16 different cuts, and just, you know, boiling it down more and more and more, looking at things. You know, Kris would look at something and say, I don't think I would say that, or the way that it's coming across isn't quite right. And then sharing it internally, you know, our company, Breakwater Studios, we would share it with everybody, get their feedback, you know, what's working, what's not working, what's redundant, what's emotionally working or not working. And it's just a process of really refinement, for lack of a better word, and really just keeping an eye on the ball that this is an emotional machine. And if when Horace passes the suit jacket to Kris at the end, you don't feel that bloom of love and pride and an outpouring of appreciation, really, we haven't done our job yet. So we just keep working on it, which we did during the pandemic over Zoom, over Vimeo, for many, many months. Glamorous life of a filmmaker.
The next question we have is, what is this, from Skylar. Ben, do you have any advice for aspiring short doc filmmakers first starting out? Also, what are some things to keep in mind when working with brands?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about that, but I won't bore you with too much brand stuff. But Skylar, I recognize your name, and if you want to email me, I will answer your brand question. In terms of if you're an aspiring short documentary filmmaker, what I would say is that you're in the right place. If you're an aspiring filmmaker, short documentaries are the lowest cost way to make a beautiful film. There's not a great market for them. You're not going to get paid a lot of money for them. but it's never been a better time to make a short documentary. And the piece of advice I always give young filmmakers is that when you receive rejection, just remember it's because the industry is oversubscribed and congested. And there are a lot of people trying to get in, more people than there are jobs. And so when you get rejected, or if you give negative feedback, or someone ignores you, or you send a passionate email or a tweet and somebody doesn't get back to you, it's not because of you. It's because of the way the industry is right now, which we're obviously trying to fix. But you got to let that slide off your back and keep going, because the people that are the most successful, the people who run the industry, oftentimes have the most persistence. So just, buffer yourself and drum up as much persistence as you can. That's probably one of your most powerful tools. And in this film, right, Horace, you cannot stop me. There's nothing you can do to slow that guy down. And look at the success that he had in the face of the worst obstacles. So that would be my little piece of advice.
We have another question from Catherine Kramer. She's asking, Kris, how old is Grandpa? How old is he?
He's 92 now. Yeah, he was 91 when we shot this. He's 92 now.
Amazing. I think you kind of got to this, but I'll ask it again to see if there's anything new. This is from Maddie. She says, I expect there is a pressure in representing Kris's family well. So how did you decide what ultimately made it in?
Well, first, I also want to say how deep Ben went immediately. I think that I was expecting Ben to just kind of ask for some old family photos and all that kind of stuff. And then that night, I was talking to my dad, and he was like, yeah, Ben's asking about Bascom, Florida, and then got in touch with this family that lives on the farm next door, and all of these things. The level of research, I think, goes to how much it feels important, like he said earlier, to get the story right. And I feel like he just took it felt, I knew that my grandfather felt like his story was being treated with respect and love and care because of how much Ben immediately went to try to enrich it with material.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting process with Kris being in the film. So there were some things that made sense for Kris to do the heavy lifting on, and other things that made sense for me to do the heavy lifting on. So a lot of that stuff of digging up the old archival and stuff like that was so much fun, of finding that picture of the Beavises, the other family, the white family in Bascom, and it's the pandemic, and just calling people over and over again, trying to find those things and convincing them to scan footage of photos and stuff like that. The goal was never to portray them in Kris's family or Horace or Kris in some kind of idealistic light. The goal was to try to express the spirit of the truth that was evident in the interview. And so we tried to just put all of those things in there, from Kris dealing with his grandfather's cancer diagnosis to the challenges that Kris's grandfather has, to the Kris's vulnerability and feeling like an imposter in Hollywood. It's not supposed to be a PR piece for anybody. It's supposed to really be something that takes a story that really passed in silence for 70 years in Kris's family and in Horace's mind, and just sort of known amongst a small group of people, and lift it up as, this is an important American story. And so that there have been so many more people that have said, yes, we agree. I mean, can you just imagine what it feels like to be Horace Bowers right now? Having so many years ago done so much hard work and had made all these sacrifices, that now the story of your life is being executive produced by Ava DuVernay. It is on the nightly news, and you're getting letters from old friends, and it's shortlisted for an Academy Award. I mean, I just hearing him say, I never expected to be here. I didn't even know why they were interviewing me, and seeing what's happening. I mean, it's about as gratifying as you could get as a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. We have another question actually about Ava DuVernay, and she is one of the executive producers on the film. Did she have any influence on the project?
No, she came in at the end, or really after it was made. We reached out to her to see if she might even just like promote it or talk about it or even just tweet.
Tweet it.
I feel like Ava's tweets are very highly sought after. And she watched the film and she called me immediately and was like, Kris, if I'm going to put my name on this, I want to be a part of it and really have my hands in supporting it. And I can't put my name on it unless I do something. So let me tell you what I want to do to really help. And that kind of confidence and like support from her was so really surprising and really overwhelming. We really appreciate it for sure.
And has been so generous. I mean, Kris and I have never gone through this before. It's a whole rigmarole, the whole shortlist Academy Awards thing, and her, just she shows up, she shows up and she talks about the film and she, advocates for this film together with Kris and I and Horace. And it's just like, I don't think there's anyone busier in Hollywood. And I think that just is a testament both to her character and to her word. That someone that's successful and she says, I will help you, get the word about this film, she's there. And, I hope everybody knows that about her because I think it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Cheryl has a question for you, Kris, about your grandfather and if he ever visited you at Juilliard or wrote to you when you were there.
Yeah, they came out a couple of times. I mean, what's funny is actually, I didn't think about this until that question, but one of the reasons he didn't come out that often is because of the snow. He literally was like, I won't come during the winter, even though I think one year they came and visited me in winter and he was not that happy about it. But yeah, they visited me at least once a year, I would say, and they came to I went to Juilliard for my undergrad and my master's. And so they came for my undergrad recital, my master's recital. They came to my graduation. That picture in the film is from my graduation at Juilliard. They came a decent amount and were really even like financially helpful through the process. Yeah, they were very, very involved.
We have another question from James O'Keefe. Can you articulate the trust you had in one another with this delicate story to get it right and how important that was?
Jim O'Keefe, this is my good friend and my 290 professor in whose class I made my first documentary.
Wow. Oh man, that's
and
awesome.
Set me on the course. Would not be here without Jim. But Jim's question is, of course, a very poignant one about trust. I guess we kind of just fell into it and kind of found each other, leaning on each other and going through this process. I guess it helped, Kris, that we knew each other before, but I don't know if there was any point where we took the leap. I guess we said yes to it and we found ourselves in the middle of it, I suppose. Yeah,
and I think also because we, again, come from that, like just being flexible and comfortable with improvisation and all of that kind of stuff, I think is really, I think about it the same way, like when you're playing with a musician together, there's a moment where you feel like, how much are we going to listen to each other here? Like if I play something, how much are you going to respond to that? And if you play something, how much am I going to respond to that? And I've always been, that's why I love pianos, because I've always been the kind of person that wants to accompany somebody so I can try to figure out how to offer something and have a moment to like, to offer something myself. And so I've always loved that back and forth. And I think you find that in collaborative relationships as well. And I think being that Ben is such a similar, has such a similar approach to collaboration, I feel like that's really what made it so easy, that we both kind of have this like yes and approach to it.
Yeah, I think we also, Kris and I are very similar age. I'm 30, Kris is 31. So I think we, sort of see eye to eye on that. I also think that we both just have a reverence and we both know that we wouldn't be here without our parents and grandparents. Like we both have some very supportive families. And so I think we were just aligned from the beginning in wanting to make something that had that meaning. At least for my part, I admired Kris and his work. The most, I was just talking about this today, the part of the concerto that's like this, like, it's very beautiful. The movie ends on this, is probably, the most simple part of this very virtuosic, you know, tumultuous, big, you know, just incredible concerto. And we're trying to get the full concerto released so everybody can hear, you know, what Kris can do with an orchestra, if you don't already know. But, you know, I've just always admired Kris's just sheer talent. I think he's, you know, John Williams level talented. And, you know, John Williams, the other film composer who started as a jazz pianist. I like to drop that little factoid in. But I'm a big film music nerd, so I think the admiration helps in any collaboration.
Totally.
Bobette Buster has a question. Can you discuss the artistic choices to create the large black space around a small portal view, which you do 3 times? Why did you choose that different visual choice?
So there's actually a funny answer for this, which Kris may not know because he was in the audience. But the Walt Disney Concert Hall is they're very protective of the people in the audience. Little do you know, when you go to the Walt Disney Concert Hall, there's all kinds of people working to make sure you have a flawless acoustic and visual experience. And so we had hired a Steadicam, and we had all that. We brought everything to the table. And when we got there, they said, you can't put the Steadicam on in the hall during the performance. We're like, what the heck, you know? And so all we could do during the performance was be backstage. And when you're backstage, all there is this little square that you can look, the stage manager can look through. So I said, okay, we're going to shoot it, and it's going to be this artistic thing, and we're going to go Dutch and come in on this thing. And maybe we can try to frame Kris in there. And if you look closely enough, Kris and his grandfather are in that little square. It's probably too small to see. But that's why. It's because we were banished from the concert hall, and we had this, you know, we had spent all this money on this Steadicam, and we wanted to do something with them. So that's where that shot came from.
Suki asks, even though you are friends, were there any challenges in terms of disagreements or ethical concerns that you had to contend with when making this film? If so, how did you work through those challenges?
No, I don't think so. I feel like, yeah. I think just the way we approach, again, communication. I think in addition to collaboration, which I think they're one and the same, but I feel like yeah, we can talk about a lot of things, and I think we're the type of people where like we are open to any sort of dialogue. So yeah, it was pretty smooth.
I remember being protective. You know, we're both super busy, but I remember at the beginning of the process being very protective of Kris's schedule, because I felt like early on this was kind of like my idea and like asking him to be a part of it. And eventually, obviously, it became like, this is both of our babies and we got to take care of it 50-50. But at the beginning, I remember being like very worried about, you know, asking too much of him and this thing that's growing and growing and growing. But that didn't last very long. And we both kind of, you know, picked it up and became protective parents of it. But no, no drama to report, unfortunately. Sorry to disappoint you.
Yeah. Jana asks, Ben, have you ever made a documentary about your own family?
I have not. It's actually one of my biggest regrets that I never interviewed my dad before he passed away. But actually, my first narrative project was about it. It's so funny. It's a conversation. It's a fictional conversation between my grandfather and me. And it goes back in time and tracks his story as a poultry geneticist and how he made this very, you know, spontaneous decision that rippled through time and affected my life. It's called Dinner with Fred. You know, little did I know 10 years later, I would be making this film with Kris that had a very similar tone to it. But no, I've never made a documentary about my family. I think I'd have to go back to Scotland and the Netherlands to track down the Proudfoot, see where they come from. Maybe one day. There's a lot of other more interesting stories to tell in the meantime.
Olivia and Maddie, I'm gonna bring your question together because you both asked about vulnerability. And for Kris and Ben, like what vulnerability means to you, and how do you maintain vulnerability and do work that is honest?
I think for me, as far as the work, it feels like the healthiest place to put a lot of those vulnerable feelings and moments. I feel like it's so. I feel like for me, that's just the most rewarding space to put that feeling and that energy. And as far as what it means to me, I feel like it's something that is very new and foreign. I feel like I definitely come from. I think I have my wife to thank for a lot of my growth and vulnerability. I feel like yeah, just the way that I grew up and the way that I was, I definitely thought that I had a lot of like naive thoughts of what it meant to be vulnerable. I feel like I was the kind of kid that like even being a musician was already being a little too soft in some of the places, in some of the areas I grew up in. So I feel like, being vulnerable was never a positive thing. And I feel like now, like getting older and then realizing what it is that I wanted more of in my childhood, I feel like is a space to have that vulnerability in a way that feels safe, or like, any of those kinds of things. And so having that in mind and wanting to try to figure out how to not only like set out to find that myself, or cultivate that myself, but also then being even more aware of trying to help other people feel that way as well. Like I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who I've known since 17 at Juilliard, my freshman year. He was like my roommate when we first moved out to college and all that stuff. And the other day he just told me, he was like, I have to say, to be honest, he was like, I love you, man. I was like, yeah, I love you too. And he was like, I have to say, to be honest, you've said I love you to me for years, and it always made me feel really weird, because I was like, why are you saying, like, he's like, I know, I get it, I guess, but he's like, but you actually saying that word feels strange to me. And like wanting to be able to encourage more of that in my own circle, and find that myself, I think is what it means for me.
My wife is watching.
Yeah, great.
And I don't think I can come out here and say that I'm this great master at vulnerability. I actually think that documentary filmmaking in some way is a great escapade to avoid being vulnerable. I coax other people into being vulnerable, and then make the film about them and how great they are and being vulnerable. I think I've got a long way to go. I think vulnerability, being vulnerable, being truly vulnerable, meaning that you're opening yourself up to getting hurt, right? Deeply hurt, deeply wounded. There's a lot of false things that we do that seem like vulnerability, but they're not really. I mean, that is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And I feel like, filmmaking is kind of one of these ways that we can kind of like sort of do that, but not really, because it's about someone else. So I don't know. I think I've got a long way to go on that. I don't know. I don't necessarily think I'm someone who likes being vulnerable. Nobody likes being vulnerable, right? We pay a lot of money to try to get smart people to help us be vulnerable, but I don't think I can honestly say I'm particularly good at it.
Cool. Okay, there's 3 more. One just came back. Okay, Dr. Ruth asks, by chance, Kris, did you play piano by ear before you studied at Juilliard? I'm curious to know if you have perfect pitch.
I wouldn't say I have perfect pitch. I have really, really good pitch, especially because, a lot of my training was by ear. So my parents, they found lessons for me when I was about 4, where I learned how to read music, and they put me in like music theory when I was like 8 years old, and classical piano. And so I definitely had a pretty rigorous training when it came to reading music and the theoretical side of it. But the side that where I really feel like pulled me along the way, as far as really getting into piano, was jazz, and all of that was by ear, and just transcribing things and then learning how to like represent that myself. And one of the biggest shifts for me as a pianist was when one of my teachers told me to sing what I was playing when I was improvising, or sing what I'm playing as I'm playing, and how much it then is connected directly to your voice and what you're trying to say. And yeah, so I feel like because of that, you're then searching for what's in your head, and your ear has to get even better because like you're grabbing at things that you're just, you know, kind of guessing at. So yeah, I feel like by ear was a lot of it, and I definitely was trained theoretically, but I feel like by ear is kind of the biggest influence on me.
Okay, there are three more questions. I'm going to condense two of them. Durartu and Ella. Kris, your grandfather's response to your moments of feeling like an imposter, you wouldn't be there if you weren't supposed to be there. It's easy to lose sight of that message. How do you keep your grandfather's words in mind? And for the both of you, what is one lesson you learned while working on this film that will stay with you in your future projects and beyond?
It's funny. I definitely remind myself of that line from my grandfather, but that's still I still have a difficult time convincing myself of it very honestly. So I think that really what I focus on is the fact that is what Ben said, like the work, like that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. That like no matter how much I feel like I belong here, you know, if the work doesn't stand up to it, then you know it doesn't really matter. So I feel like for me, if I just focus on, you know, knowing that if I do the best work that I feel I possibly can, and you know, at least then I can be proud of it. And especially since, again, you know, belonging here is so frustrating when it's decided by other people, and when like that space is not, you know, you have no control in dictating what that looks like, what that means. And so, you know, trying to put less stake in that actually, and feeling a bit more like as long as I've done the work to feel happy about it myself, then it's good enough for me. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so these last two questions, I'm condensing them. So Suki and Olivia, Suki asks, what were the greatest challenges in being filmed for you, Kris, while working as co-director, and Ben, greatest challenge in co-directing with the person in front of the camera? And Ben, if you could just speak more to an aha moment, if any, when you knew that you wanted to be a director.
Well, challenge. It honestly was not very challenging. The only thing that was challenging about it is that I knew Kris was so uncomfortable in front of the camera. I you know, like Kris is he's a film composer, right? So he's a composer, right? And now he's a performer, he's a pianist too. But like a film composer is like the most behind the scenes possible person, but they're really, you know, doing most of the emotional heavy lifting. And I think, you know, Kris is comfortable in that storyteller role, as I'm comfortable sort of behind the scenes making all the magic happen. So I guess it was a challenge knowing that I was putting Kris in a vulnerable position. And, you know, but we were sort of aligned on the thing that we were making. So it didn't create too much of a problem there. In terms of an aha moment when I knew I wanted to be a director, you know, I was a magician as a teenager. So I was really into that. And then I didn't want to do magic anymore. And I saw the video for USC Film School online. And I was like, oh my God, I go somewhere where George Lucas teaches me how to do screenwriting, and Steven Spielberg's going to personally show me how to direct a movie. That's where I want to go. I just thought it was kind of like being a magician, basically. And then I just, you know, have continued to delude myself that I'm, you know, I should do it. And I just haven't failed too huge yet. But I think it was that. It was the closest thing I could find to being a magician without having to live in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I guess for me, as far as the comfortability, yeah, Ben's totally right. Yeah, I definitely. What's funny about it is like, you know, I feel so comfortable, like, you know, not in front of the camera, that I feel like anytime I need to be in front of the camera, like my mother's voice is in my head as far as like what I look like, what she's gonna think, like, did I get a haircut? And she's horrified by the fact that I've been doing so many interviews and Zooms with like long hair and a beard and all this stuff. But but because of that, you know, I really appreciate Ben for continuing to facilitate a space for me to feel comfortable, you know, and you know, he first shows up and I'm like wearing a button-up shirt and like really looking presentable and all this stuff, and he's like, would you really like you're talking to your grandfather. Would you really like come to his house and like be wearing that when you come and just sit down and talk to him? And, when we got to my place and shot me writing late at night, he's like, what would you actually be wearing if you were here at home writing at night? And, feeling like I can not have to like present this idea of what it is, but rather just kind of be comfortable, I think is something that took a second for me to get used to. And yeah, but other than that, I feel like it was like once let going that and kind of me just recognizing what Ben was getting at, I feel like then it was just like, yeah, totally. And I felt completely comfortable. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're getting so much love in the chat. You two are getting so much love in the chat.
God, these questions have been awesome. This
yeah,
is like
thank
the best
you.
Q&A
Appreciate
we've
it.
done.
Yeah.
Jana says, I hope you win the Academy Award. So
Oh, thanks so much.
Your lips to God's ears. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Also, my I have to say, my wife told me to say fight on because she went to USC and she said that I must do that.
I'm glad we got that recorded. Okay. Well, thank you both. This is like a dream for me. So I just feel so lucky to talk to you both. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You really did a wonderful job, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to see your films because I think you're an extraordinarily talented interviewer. So
100%.
hope you can make some.
Thank you guys so much. Nana will definitely be moderating more for us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Raise your rate, Nana. Let's start getting that money.
This was really amazing, and I wish you guys all the luck with the Oscars as well. I can't wait to see how things go. March 15th, right? That's when they announce.
That's the big moment. Yeah,
for
we're waking up early.
Awesome.
And thank you, Alex, for organizing this, and thanks everybody
My
for
pleasure.
coming.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Alex.
It's been a wonderful evening.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
All right, good night.
Good night.